The sun was barely peeking over the distant hills, casting a soft, golden glow across the wide plains that stretched out from the ranch. The air was still, the only sound the creaking of an old barn door as it swayed in the breeze. Ivan Cole stood at the front of the house, staring at the woman in the doorway. Anna Wilder, a quiet stranger with a small bundle in hand, was leaving. The morning light was warm on her face, but Ivan felt nothing but the cold ache of failure inside. The two children clung to her skirt, their small faces wet with tears. Tommy, just 6, grabbed her hand and looked up at her with pleading eyes. "Don't go, Mama. Please don't go," he begged, his voice shaking. Little Grace, only 4, pulled on Anna's other arm, her big eyes wide with worry. "Mama, stay. We need you," she cried softly, her tiny voice full of desperation. Ivan stood frozen in the doorway, watching his world crumble in front of him. His heart hammered in his chest, his throat tight with the unspeakable fear that he had lost something precious, something he didn't know how to fix. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but his feet wouldn't move. What had gone wrong? How had it come to this? But Anna, with her quiet strength and tender heart, seemed to understand what was at stake. She bent down to Tommy, brushing his hair from his face. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice soft but firm. "I have to go, but I'll always remember you." Grace whimpered, clinging to Anna's skirt, and Anna gently pried her fingers away, giving the little girl one last hug before standing. Ivan wanted to call out, to beg her to stay, but his tongue felt tied. What could he say? He wasn't even sure he deserved her, or if he could offer her anything but heartache. He had built walls around himself long ago, walls that had kept the pain of losing his wife Sarah at bay. But they had also kept the warmth of family out, and now he could see that warmth slipping through his fingers. Anna stood up straight, her shoulders squared as she glanced back at Ivan. He met her eyes, his own heart sinking even further. He wanted to explain, to say something, anything, to make her stay. But what could he say? Why did he have to ask her to stay when he had barely spoken to her in weeks? Anna stepped out of the doorway, her back straight and her footsteps firm as she walked down the porch steps. The two children followed her like shadows, each one trying to hold on to the last bit of the motherly love Anna had given them. They had come to see her as their own, but Ivan hadn't seen it coming. He hadn't understood how much they needed her, how much they were already depending on her. Why did they call her Mama? The question swirled in Ivan's mind as he stood there, unable to move. He had hired Anna to cook and clean, to fill a practical need in his broken household. But somehow, over the course of just a few weeks, she had become something more. She had become a lifeline for Tommy and Grace, a bridge between the shattered pieces of their past and the fragile hope of a future. And now, she was leaving, and Ivan didn't know how to stop her. Anna's footsteps faded into the distance, and Ivan's world seemed to fall silent. He could hear Tommy's cries and Grace's soft sobs, but the sound felt like it was coming from somewhere far away. His eyes were fixed on the empty doorway, on the place where Anna had stood just moments before. He could feel his heart breaking, but he didn't know how to fix it. How could he make things right when he had no idea how they had gone so wrong? The children's cries grew louder, and Ivan turned slowly, as if waking from a long, painful dream. He couldn't let this happen. He couldn't lose her. But how could he make it right when he hadn't even known what was broken? This story begins 4 weeks earlier, when everything had seemed so simple. Back then, Ivan Cole was a man lost in his grief, barely keeping things together on his ranch. He had been a widower for 2 years, ever since his wife Sarah had died in childbirth. Their child had died too, leaving Ivan to raise Tommy and Grace alone. But he had buried his pain in work, and in doing so, he had let his family slip further away from him. The ranch had fallen into disrepair. Meals were burned or forgotten, clothes piled up in corners. Tommy had become angry and distant, his once bright eyes now full of resentment. Grace hadn't spoken a word since Sarah's death. She sat quietly, clutching a ragged doll, her silent sorrow a constant reminder of the hole in their lives. Ivan had no idea how to fix it. He couldn't even fix himself. Elias, the old ranch hand who had worked with Ivan's father, saw the toll the grief had taken on the family. One morning, as they worked side by side in the barn, Elias spoke his mind. "Those babies need more than food, Ivan," he said, his weathered face lined with concern. "They need warmth. They need someone to care for him, someone who can heal what's been broken." Ivan grunted, not meeting Elias's gaze. "I don't need charity," he muttered. "I could take care of my own." Elias's voice softened, but his words were firm. "It ain't charity, boy. It's survival. Look at your children. They're not going to make it without help." Ivan saw the way Tommy wore his clothes, torn and dirty, and how Grace clutched her doll as if it was the only thing left in the world. He didn't want to admit Elias was right, but deep down, he knew he was. The ranch was falling apart, and so was his family. After a long pause, Ivan sighed and nodded. "Fine," he said, defeated, "but just for cooking and cleaning. Nothing more." Elias nodded approvingly. Sometimes, the help you need is the help you never expected. So, Anna Wilder arrived, recommended by the preacher. She came with a small bag and quiet eyes, her clothes worn but clean. Ivan greeted her with cold words, his walls thick and high. "You cook, you clean, you mind the children when I'm working. That's all." Anna's voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Yes, sir. Thank you for the opportunity." She didn't argue, didn't push for more. She simply nodded and accepted what was offered, knowing that this job was more about survival for her than anything else. She needed refuge, and this place offered it, even if it meant she had to tread lightly around a man who had buried his heart beneath years of pain. That first evening, as Anna unpacked in the small room off the kitchen, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the family's brokenness. The house was cold, and the children's silence echoed in the halls. But as she watched them from the kitchen window, she whispered a prayer to herself. "Help me help them, please." Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would change all of their lives. The first week in the house was a delicate dance of observation and quiet acts of care. Anna moved through the rooms like a shadow, always gentle, never imposing. She cooked hearty meals, bread that smelled warm and inviting, stews that filled the house with the scent of comfort, cornbread that softened the cold air. She didn't demand anything from the children, allowing them space to come to her when they were ready. Her presence in the kitchen became a constant, steady hum in the otherwise silent house. The children still wary, but unable to avoid the small kindnesses she left in her wake. Tommy's resistance was palpable. He refused to acknowledge her, treating her like a stranger who had no place in their home. He would deliberately make messes just to see if she would react. When he knocked over the water bucket she had just filled, he stared at her with defiance. But Anna didn't scold him. She simply cleaned the mess quietly, her calm demeanor only fueling his frustration. "Why don't you yell at me?" he demanded one day, his face scrunched up with confusion. Anna looked at him with gentle eyes. "Because anger isn't what you need right now," she said softly, her words a steady balm to his raw emotions. Grace, on the other hand, said nothing. She rarely looked at Anna, her gaze always distant and withdrawn. Her only constant companion was a ragged doll that had seen better days. Anna noticed the doll's worn-out arm, stuffing spilling from the seams, and one night, while Grace slept, she mended it carefully, sewing the arm back together and making sure it was strong once more. The next morning, when Grace saw the repaired doll, her eyes softened for a moment, and though she didn't speak, something in her changed. Anna wasn't sure if it was a sign of acceptance or just curiosity, but she took it as a small victory. The silence that hung between her and the children felt like a wall she couldn't break down. Ivan, too, kept his distance. He barely spoke to Anna, offering only grunts and nods when she addressed him. Meals were eaten in near silence, and once he finished, He would disappear into the barn or fields, retreating into his work like it was the only thing left that made sense. But there were moments, small ones, when Anna caught him watching her. He noticed the way her hands worked, how she kneaded bread with a gentle rhythm, her fingers moving as if they were the very pulse of the house. She hummed hymns under her breath as she worked, and it was in those moments that Ivan felt something stir inside him, something he couldn't quite name. The children's plates were always full, and she saved the best portions for them. Anna never asked for anything in return, never made demands, and it was this quiet, steady kindness that began to wear down Ivan's walls, though he wouldn't admit it. Elias, who had been around long enough to see the changes in the house, noticed too. "That woman's got a kind heart," he said one morning while the two of them worked in the barn. "The children are calmer already." Ivan scoffed, shrugging off the compliment. "She's just the cook," he muttered, not wanting to acknowledge the truth of Elias's words. But Elias wasn't convinced. "Keep telling yourself that, boy," he said with a knowing smile. Ivan didn't know what to make of it, so he said nothing. At night, as the house settled into the quiet of sleep, Ivan would lie awake, hearing the soft sounds of Anna's crying through the thin walls. It wasn't the loud, desperate sobs of a broken woman, but the quiet weeping of someone who had carried too much sorrow for too long. He wanted to ask her what hurt her, but his own walls held him back. His pain, the grief of losing Sarah, had made him distant, and now he realized how it had kept him from seeing what was happening right in front of him. As the days passed, small signs began to show that the children were beginning to trust Anna in ways Ivan hadn't expected. One Sunday evening, after a simple dinner, Anna sat down with the children to read from the Bible. Grace, who had been a ghost in the house for so long, inched closer to her, drawn by the sound of Anna's gentle voice. Tommy pretended to be uninterested, staring out the window, but the rocks he had once thrown with such defiance now lay forgotten by his side. Ivan stood in the doorway of the barn, watching them from a distance, his heart in turmoil. He saw Grace leaning against Anna, her head resting on the older woman's shoulder, and he felt a twinge of guilt and something else, something deeper, like the first stirrings of hope. He turned away before anyone could see the emotions crossing his face, before anyone could witness the softening of the man he had become. That night, Anna tucked the children in a bed with a tenderness that seemed to quiet the house, a softness that had been missing for so long. Their resistance had lessened, ever so slightly, and as she kissed their foreheads, she felt a small flicker of hope for the future. Maybe, just maybe, the walls that had been built between them were beginning to come down, one gentle act of kindness at a time. But the road ahead was still long. Anna wasn't sure if she would ever fully break through the children's pain, or if Ivan would ever open up enough to let her in. All she could do was keep going, keep trying, and pray that in time they would heal together. As she lay awake that night, hearing Ivan's heavy footsteps above, she knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. The walls were high, and the wounds were deep, but there was a part of her that believed they could heal if only they allowed themselves to try. The journey was far from over. By the end of the second week, the fragile threads that held the family together were starting to show signs of fraying. But something else was beginning to emerge. Small moments of connection, glimmers of hope that maybe, just maybe, the wounds could heal. Grace, whose silence had been as constant as the mountains on the horizon, had started to show the first signs of breaking through. It was a quiet afternoon when she wandered off, her small form slipping unnoticed from the house. The panic set in quickly, Tommy's angry shouts calling for her, Ivan's frantic search through the house, and then the mounting fear that she had gone to the creek or the hills, places dangerous for a child too small to know the risks. Ivan and Elias, both gripped with fear, called out her name as they searched, their voices growing hoarse with worry. Anna, however, remained calm. She didn't join the frantic search. Instead, she simply walked quietly into the meadow behind the house, where she found Grace sitting among the wildflowers, her tiny fingers delicately plucking yellow blooms. Grace wasn't lost at all. She was just sitting, silently gathering flowers. And it didn't rush her or force words into the silence. She simply sat beside her, the two of them in the stillness of the meadow, surrounded by the peaceful hum of nature. Grace's whisper broke the quiet. "Mama liked yellow flowers," she said, the first word she had spoken in over 2 years. Anna's heart twisted with a mixture of sadness and tenderness as she looked at the girl. "Then let's pick the prettiest ones for her," Anna replied softly. They worked together in silence, braiding the flowers into a crown, an offering of love and memory for the woman Grace had lost. Ivan, who had been searching in the distance, came upon them just as Grace placed the flower crown on the mantel next to her mother's photograph. The sight of it stopped him cold, and he stood there, unmoving, watching as Grace smiled, a real full smile for the first time in years. His breath caught in his throat. For the first time in a long while, he saw his daughter's eyes filled with something other than sorrow. It was as if the light of the past had started to shine through the cracks of the grief that had buried them all. That night at supper, Grace sat beside Anna instead of at the far end of the table, her body still stiff with uncertainty, but she was there. Tommy, watching, felt something stir inside him. Was it jealousy, confusion, or perhaps hope? He couldn't decide. But one thing was clear. He was starting to feel like he was losing his place in this new family. He couldn't understand why his sister seemed to accept Anna so easily. But he still resisted, still held on to the anger that had festered in his heart since his mother's death. That night, as Anna tucked them into bed, Grace took her hand and gave it a tiny squeeze. The action, so simple yet so significant, nearly broke Anna's heart. She had no idea how long it would take for Tommy to open up, or if Grace would continue to let herself be seen. But these small steps felt like victories. They were cracks in a wall that had held them apart, cracks that might one day widen into something more. Tommy, meanwhile, remained difficult and stubborn, refusing to accept Anna's attempts to connect. His anger was a shield, a way of holding the pain at bay. One afternoon, while Anna was tending to the barn, Tommy, in a rare moment of defiance, decided to saddle a horse on his own. He was too small for it, but the stubbornness of youth made him determined. It wasn't long before he lost his balance and fell hard, twisting his ankle painfully. Too proud to ask for help, he sat in the barn, tears welling up as the pain throbbed through his leg. He stayed silent, trying to be tough, but his body betrayed him, and the tears began to fall. It was Anna who found him, and though she could have scolded him, she didn't. She knelt beside him, her hands gentle as she examined his ankle. "Let me see, sweetheart," she said, using the tender words she had started to use with him, despite his resistance. Tommy flinched at the word sweetheart, but Anna didn't pull away. She treated his injury with care, never once speaking harshly. "I'm not your sweetheart," he snapped through his tears, his anger flaring up again. "You're not my mama." Anna nodded, not offended, just understanding. "You're right," she said, her voice calm and steady. "I'm not your mama, but I care if you're hurt." She cleaned his ankle and wrapped it as best as she could, all the while speaking softly, not trying to replace the mother he had lost, but simply making space for the grief that was still so raw. When she finished, she didn't try to force him to talk, but instead said, "Being angry is easier than being sad. I understand that." Tommy, surprised by her understanding, looked at her through tear-filled eyes. "You do?" he asked quietly. Anna nodded, her gaze soft. "I've been angry too," she said. "It doesn't make the hurt go away, but it feels safer." Tommy's voice trembled as he whispered, "I miss her." Anna didn't try to offer false comfort. "I know," she said simply, "and you always will. That's what love means." Tommy didn't say anything more, but the look in his eyes softened just a little. It was the first crack in the armor he had built around his heart. Ivan, who had watched from the barn doorway, saw Anna tending to Tommy in the quiet way she had handled his anger. He saw the tenderness in her that he hadn't allowed himself to see before. That night, for the first time, he approached her. "Thank you," he said gruffly. "For my son." Anna looked up, surprised by the genuine emotion in his voice. "He's a good boy," she replied softly. "He just hurts." Ivan swallowed, the words stuck in his throat. He couldn't bring himself to say more, couldn't tell her how much he appreciated what she had done, how she was slowly becoming a part of their lives. But his heart, for the first time, was starting to soften. The walls he had spent so long building were beginning to crack, and a tiny seed of hope that had been planted in his chest began to take root. The next few days were filled with small, everyday moments that slowly turned the house into something more. The children began to warm to Anna in their own way. Mornings were spent with Anna braiding Grace's hair, while the girl chattered about things only a child could find important. Afternoons were spent with Tommy helping Anna bake, stealing bits of dough when she wasn't looking. Evenings brought stories by the fire. The children snuggled close to Anna, her gentle voice reading tales of old. Ivan found himself lingering longer at the dinner table, reluctant to leave, his gaze often drifting toward Anna when he thought no one was watching. There were no words between them, but the tension was there, thick and undeniable. The house was changing, and with it, the way they all saw each other. The moment that had begun so painfully was transforming into something else, something stronger, something that felt like the beginnings of family. But even as the distance between them shrank, there was still so much unsaid, so many unspoken feelings left between them. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Anna believed that maybe they were on the right path. As the days passed and the weeks turned into a month, the house on the ranch slowly transformed from a place of sorrow and silence into something resembling home. The laughter that had once been absent from the kitchen now filled the air as Anna moved through the house with the children by her side, her care and tenderness reaching them in ways she couldn't have imagined when she first arrived. Every morning, Grace would run to Anna, asking her to braid her hair, her tiny hands pulling at the strands as Anna worked her fingers through the curls with practiced ease. Grace had started talking again, her voice growing stronger with each passing day, and her eyes were less haunted, less distant. Tommy, though still stubborn and filled with anger, had begun to trust Anna in small ways. He would help her bake, though it was clear he was really just there to sneak pieces of dough when she wasn't looking. He didn't say much, but there was a softness in him now, a quiet shift that hadn't been there before. The house, which had once felt so cold and empty, now felt warm, lived in, full of the sounds of children's voices and the steady rhythm of daily life. It was in the quiet moments, like when they sat down at meals together, that Ivan began to notice the changes more than anything. Anna had a way of making sure the children were always served first, ensuring they ate well before she ever took a bite herself. She was never demanding or selfish, never drawing attention to herself. She was never demanding or selfish, never drawing attention to herself. She simply moved through their lives with a gentle presence, making everything feel right in ways Ivan had never known before. And then there were the small moments between him and Anna, moments that felt full of meaning even without words. One morning, as he entered the kitchen, Anna poured his coffee exactly the way he liked it, strong and black, without him ever asking. It wasn't the kind of thing he'd ever noticed before, but now, with Anna there, it felt different. The way she mended his shirts, making sure every tear was stitched with care, felt like something more than just housekeeping. It was as if she was mending something in him as well. Ivan found himself lingering longer at the dinner table, unwilling to leave. The work on the ranch could wait, but the warmth of the family around him, the small but significant changes happening in his heart, couldn't. He caught himself looking at Anna more than once, not with the coldness he had once used to shield himself in the world, but with something deeper, something he didn't fully understand yet. He noticed, too, how Anna would sometimes look at him, her gaze soft and thoughtful, as if she too was trying to figure out what had changed between them. The connection between them had deepened, though neither spoke of it aloud. The walls that had once seemed so insurmountable were slowly crumbling, bit by bit, as they learned to share the space, to share the burden of loss, and to find healing in each other's company. One evening, as they gathered around the table for dinner, Tommy, who had been quieter than usual, suddenly spoke up. He was reaching for the bread, his hand trembling slightly, when he said, "Mama, can you pass the butter?" The words hung in the air, both innocent and charged with so much emotion. For a moment, everything in the room froze. Tommy's face went pale, and he looked at the photograph of his mother on the mantel, as if seeking her approval, her forgiveness. He stood still for a long time, as if waiting for something to happen. Grace, who had been sitting silently, spoke first, her voice simple and without hesitation. "Tommy called you Mama," she said, her words quiet but full of truth. Anna's heart clenched, and she looked at Tommy, who was now standing by the table, his eyes wide with shock and confusion. She didn't know what to say, but the look in her eyes was enough. She didn't mind. It was okay. She wanted to comfort him, to let him know that it wasn't wrong, that it was okay for him to see her as something more than just the cook. Ivan, who had been silent until now, stood up abruptly. His heart pounded in his chest, and he wanted to say something, anything, but words failed him. The tension in the room was palpable, and Tommy, looking more lost than ever, ran out of the room, his footsteps heavy and quick. Elias, who had been sitting quietly at the edge of the room, watching everything unfold with a knowing smile, spoke up. "Love don't run out, boy," he said to Tommy later, as the boy sat in the barn, his tears falling freely now. "Your mama in heaven wants you happy. Don't let the world make you think different." Tommy, sitting with his face buried in his hands, didn't respond. His confusion, his anger, and his guilt were all mixing together in a way that he didn't know how to untangle. But Elias's words had some effect. Slowly, Tommy's sobs quieted, and he began to understand that love wasn't something that could be measured or controlled. It didn't just disappear. It didn't vanish because things changed. Love, he realized, was something that could grow, even in the most unlikely of places. That night, as Anna tucked the children into bed, she felt a subtle shift between them. It wasn't a dramatic change, but something had moved inside of them all. Grace was more relaxed now, resting her head against Anna's chest as she listened to her gentle whispers. Tommy, still wrestling with his feelings, sat quietly, his face flushed with emotion, but his heart opening just a little bit more. Anna kissed their foreheads, her eyes closed, and for the first time since she had arrived, she allowed herself to believe that she might belong here. It was a quiet victory, but it was enough. It wasn't just about her and the children anymore. It was about something larger, something that had begun to form between them all. A family. Ivan, too, could feel the shift. He was still standing in the doorway, watching his children, watching Anna. For a brief moment, he let himself imagine a life with her. What would it be like to have her by his side, not just as the cook, but as a partner, a wife, a mother? He wasn't sure what was holding him back, but he knew that the way things were, how everything felt, was changing. There was no going back now, whether he was ready or not. They were becoming something more than just a broken family, more than just a ranch with empty rooms and cold meals. They were becoming a family, and that terrified him in the best possible way. The first Sunday outing to town had been meant to be simple, a routine trip for supplies, a chance for the family to leave the confines of the ranch and see the outside world for the first time in weeks. But as they rode into town, with Anna sitting in the back of the wagon beside Tommy and Grace, a quiet tension filled the air. Ivan was up front, his back stiff as he drove the team of horses, his mind already focused on the errands he needed to run. Tommy and Grace were chattering excitedly, pointing out sights they hadn't seen in so long, while Anna sat quietly beside them, her hands folded in her lap, her mind elsewhere. The children had already begun calling her Mama without hesitation, a shift that still felt raw and uncertain to both Ivan and Anna. She had no idea what that word meant to them, what it meant to him, but she had learned to take comfort in their small acts of affection, the ways they now sought her out, trusted her. It was clear they were all learning to see her not just as the cook, not just as a stranger, but as a person who was filling a space that had been left wide open since Sarah's death. Yet, as they neared the center of town, something shifted in the air. The people who had once known Ivan and Sarah whispered as the wagon rolled by. The children, oblivious to the judgments of the adults around them, were full of questions and curiosity, but Ivan felt the weight of the town's eyes upon them. When they reached the general store, the scene that unfolded felt like a slow-motion disaster. Two women, dressed in fine clothes and dripping with judgment, approached them as Ivan was unloading the supplies. Mrs. Hartford, with her sharp, condescending tone, spoke first. "Well, Ivan Cole, is this your help?" she asked, the word help dripping with disdain. Ivan stiffened, his hand pausing in midair. He knew what they were implying, and he felt the familiar sting of embarrassment rise in his chest. "This is Miss Anna. She keeps the house," he said, his voice clipped, his gaze directed elsewhere, not wanting to acknowledge the uncomfortable truth behind her role. But Mrs. Pruitt, who stood beside her, wasn't so easily deterred. She pressed further, her voice sugary sweet, but laced with an unmistakable venom. "Oh, how convenient," she cooed, her eyes sweeping over Anna's simple dress and worn appearance. Tommy, who had been walking beside Anna, noticed the look on the women's faces. His confusion was evident, and in a moment of innocent defiance, he stepped forward. "She is our mama," he declared, his voice steady but filled with emotion, his little hands clinging to Anna's skirt. "She takes care of us." The words hit like a blow. There was a brief, painful silence, and then the murmurs started. Whispers, glances, the low hum of disapproval rippling through the onlookers. The judgment was immediate and sharp. "Already replaced his wife," someone muttered. "Hired help playing mother," came another whisper. The town's cruelty, once hidden beneath polite facades, was now exposed in full. Anna felt the heat of their glares, the weight of their unspoken accusations. She wanted to shrink, to run back to the safety of the ranch where things were simpler, where she wasn't constantly reminded of her place. But instead, she stood still, her face carefully neutral, as the shame crept over her. She had always known that her presence in the family was complicated. She was the hired help. She had never imagined that her kindness, her attempts to care for the children, would be viewed as something opportunistic. Yet here it was, laid bare before her. As the gossip grew louder, Ivan, oblivious to the full extent of the judgment around them, continued his business, unaware of the damage being done. But Anna could feel the sharp sting of every word, every glance. She knew that she would never be accepted here, that the town would never see her for what she truly was. A woman trying to build a family, trying to give these children the love they needed. To them, she would always be just the cook. That afternoon, as the wagon rumbled back toward the ranch, the tension in the air was palpable. The children were quiet, their earlier excitement gone. Grace, sensing something was wrong, clung to Anna's side. Tommy, who had been unusually distracted, remained silent, his face a mixture of confusion and guilt. It was then that Anna, whose thoughts had been swirling since the moment they left town, began to withdraw. The kindness she had once freely given now felt like a burden, a weakness that could be twisted into something ugly. She had tried to love these children, to care for them as if they were her own, but in the eyes of the town, she was nothing more than an intruder. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Anna stayed up late, sitting at the small wooden table in the kitchen, her thoughts heavy with the weight of what had happened. She knew the truth, that she was just the hired help, No matter how much she cared for Tommy and Grace, no matter how much they had come to see her as Mama. But as she sat there, the weight of the letters she had already begun to write, one to the children, one to Ivan, pressed down on her heart. She had to leave. She couldn't stay and continue to be the source of shame and judgment. She had already given too much of herself, and now she had to walk away before it broke her. She knew she couldn't tell the children. She couldn't bear to see their faces, full of innocence and love, when she told them she was leaving. So, instead, she planned to slip away in the early morning hours before anyone could stop her, leaving only the letters behind as an explanation. When the dawn broke, Anna was already packed, her small bag resting by the door. She had written her goodbyes, short, simple notes that would never fully explain the pain of leaving, but they were the only way she could do this. She would leave the ranch behind, leave the children behind, and try to rebuild her life elsewhere. As the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the kitchen window, Anna's heart broke for the family she was about to leave behind. But she knew there was no other choice. She couldn't stay, not when the world had already told her she didn't belong. The sound of Tommy's voice calling her Mama echoed in her mind, and she stepped out into the cold morning air, her heart heavy with the knowledge that she was leaving everything she had come to care for. She could only hope that someday they would understand why she had to go. As she made her way down the path, the ranch behind her grew smaller, and with each step, the weight of the decision grew heavier. She had given all she could, but it hadn't been enough. The sun had barely begun to rise when Ivan awoke with a restless feeling in his chest. It was as if the calm of the night had been a facade, and now the weight of something unseen was pressing on him. He had slept little, tossing and turning, feeling the emptiness that had grown inside him ever since Anna arrived. He couldn't explain it, couldn't name what was happening, but he knew something was wrong. The house felt too quiet, too still. The children had already gone to breakfast, but the silence in the kitchen was deafening. Anna's absence was a gaping hole, and Ivan felt the gnawing sensation in his gut that something had shifted, something he couldn't undo. When he went to find her, his heart skipped a beat. Her room was empty, her bed neatly made, as if she had never been there at all. Panic struck. His eyes flew to the table, and there, amidst the quiet of the morning, was the letter. His hands trembled as he unfolded it, and the words on the page hit him like a physical blow. She was leaving. She was gone. The shock of it left him breathless. The letter was simple, professional, thanking him for the opportunity, but the words didn't convey the depth of the pain that Ivan could now feel in his chest. There were no explanations, no promises of return, just the cold realization that the woman he had come to rely on, to care for, was leaving without a word. Ivan's mind raced. He tried to make sense of it, but nothing added up. Why hadn't she said goodbye? Why hadn't she let him explain? And then, the children's cries pierced through his thoughts. Tommy and Grace had found the letters too, their tiny voices wailing in the next room. Tommy, in a desperate voice, ran to him. "You made her leave," he shouted, tears streaming down his face. "You never told her we wanted her." Grace's small voice echoed Tommy's, a plea for the woman who had been their mother figure for weeks. "Papa, bring Mama back, please." Ivan sank to his knees, feeling the weight of their words like an anchor pulling him down. He didn't know how to respond. He had been too late. He had let Anna slip away without ever telling her the things he should have said. He had let his own pride and fear build walls between them, and now she was gone. Elias, who had been watching from the porch, saw the distress on Ivan's face and stepped forward. He had seen Ivan struggle with his grief, seen him withdraw from life ever since Sarah's death. But this was different. Elias, with his quiet wisdom, knew what had to be done. "What did I tell you?" Elias said sharply, his voice filled with both concern and frustration. "You let her slip away, boy. Now, you're going to lose her forever if you don't act fast." Ivan stood up, his mind spinning, but one thing was clear. He couldn't let her go. He couldn't let Anna leave him without a fight. The children needed her, and more than that, he needed her. He didn't know when it had happened, but somewhere along the way, he had fallen in love with her quiet strength, her kindness, her steady presence in the house. She had healed something in him that he hadn't even known was broken, and now he was going to lose her. He wasn't going to let that happen. Without a word, Ivan mounted his horse and set off, the dust rising behind him as he rode hard toward the stage station. His heart pounded in his chest as he thought of Anna, wondering if he would catch her before she left, wondering if she would even want to see him. He wasn't sure what he would say when he found her, but he knew he couldn't let her leave without trying to explain. The ride felt endless. Ivan pushed his horse harder, willing it to go faster, as if the faster he rode, the faster he could fix the mistake he had made. The landscape blurred around him as he thought about everything he had taken for granted. Anna's kindness, her care for the children, the way she had quietly become part of their lives, part of his life. He had never told her how much she meant to him, never given her the assurance she needed to stay. And now she was gone. His thoughts turned to the children. Tommy, who had been so angry, so hurt, was now lost without her. Grace, too, had found something in Anna, something she had lost with her own mother. He couldn't let that bond be broken, not when it had only just begun to heal. As he approached the stage station, the panic inside him grew. He asked every traveler he passed if they had seen a woman with a small bundle. His heart sank with each no that came from their lips. Time was running out. He needed to find her before it was too late. The station loomed ahead, and Ivan's eyes scanned the area desperately. And then, just as he was about to lose hope, he saw her. Anna sat on a bench, a small bundle at her side, her face turned toward the horizon. She looked so small, so defeated, as though the weight of the world was on her shoulders. Ivan's breath caught in his throat, and without thinking, he dismounted and walked toward her, his footsteps unsteady but determined. She looked up as he approached, her eyes wide with surprise and wariness. Anna, he said, his voice breaking the silence between them. She didn't answer, didn't even move. Ivan's heart was pounding in his chest as he stood before her. Please don't go, he begged, his voice raw. Anna shook her head, her lips trembling. You don't need me, Ivan, she said softly. I'm just the help. I was foolish to think I could be more. Ivan's chest tightened as the words hit him like a blow. You're not just the help, Anna, he said, his voice urgent now. You never were. You're the woman my children call Mama. You've brought light back into our home, into my heart. I love you. I need you. I can't let you go. Anna's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The stagecoach pulled up, and the driver called out, "Boarding for Ashford." Ivan stepped forward, desperate. Please don't leave, he whispered, his voice breaking. Anna stood, her gaze shifting from the stagecoach to Ivan. There was a moment of hesitation, a moment when everything seemed to hang in the balance. And then, in a whisper, Anna spoke. I love you too, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I've loved you since I didn't know I was allowed to. Ivan's heart pounded as he stood in front of Anna, his mind racing, struggling to find the words that would make her stay, struggling to undo the mistake he had made by letting her slip away without ever telling her what she meant to him. The moment stretched between them, thick with emotion, with everything unspoken hanging in the air. He had never allowed himself to feel the weight of his feelings for Anna, never let himself imagine what life would be like with her beside him, not just as the cook, but as a true part of his family. But now, with her standing there in front of him, ready to walk away forever, the truth spilled out of him in a rush. Wait, Anna, he whispered, his voice shaky. She froze, her eyes still wide with disbelief, as if unsure of whether to believe him. Please don't go, Ivan continued, stepping closer, his hands trembling slightly. You don't understand. I've spent 2 years buried in grief, in this house full of shadows, And you. He paused, struggling to keep his emotions in check, but the floodgates had opened. You brought light back into this place. You gave my children their smiles again. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever. I was so scared of feeling again, so scared of loving you because I thought losing you would be worse than the emptiness I had. But I've already lost you by not saying this sooner. Anna's eyes softened, her hand instinctively reaching for his, but she hesitated, unsure if she should let herself believe him. Her voice trembled as she spoke, the quiet sorrow of her years of loss laced in her words. Ivan, I've always known my place. I came here to help, not to stay. I can't be the woman you need, the woman your children need. Her voice broke, but Ivan shook his head, stepping closer, his chest tight with emotion. You are. You already are. You're not just a cook, Anna. You're the woman my children call Mama, because that's what you are to them. To us. You made my house a home. And I love you. Completely. Desperately. I don't need to be afraid of that anymore. I want you here with us, always. Not because I'm lost, but because I found something worth holding on to. The silence between them stretched for another moment before Anna looked up at him, her face wet with unshed tears, her heart aching with the rawness of the truth. You love me, she whispered, as if unsure whether she was allowed to believe it. Ivan's gaze softened, his voice steady but full of emotion. With everything I am, Anna, with everything I have. The words hung between them, both a confession and a promise. He swallowed hard, trying to steady himself. Marry me, Anna, not as my cook, not as a stranger in my house. Marry me as my wife. Be Tommy and Grace's mother. They already chose you, and they need you. Let me be your family. Let me spend the rest of my life proving to you that you belong with us. Forever. Anna's chest tightened with emotion, her hand trembling as she reached for his. But what about the town? She asked, the fear of judgment still lingering in her heart. What about the whispers and the way they look at me? Ivan's eyes darkened with determination as he looked at her, his jaw set. Let them talk, he said firmly. You're mine, and I'm yours, and anyone who has a problem with that will have to answer to me. I'll defend you, Anna. I'll stand beside you every step of the way. You'll never face this world alone again. A sob caught in Anna's throat, and before she could stop herself, she nodded, her heart breaking with relief, with joy, with the overwhelming realization that this man, this family, was her home. I love you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I've loved you from the moment I knew I could. Ivan pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, the weight of the past few days, the past few years, finally falling away. Then stay, he murmured, pressing his cheek against her hair. Stay with me. Stay with us. You're home now. And then, in a moment that felt like everything had come full circle, Ivan kissed her, tenderly, deeply, the kind of kiss that was meant to heal, to say all the things they hadn't yet found the words for. It was a kiss that promised that the pain of the past could finally be put to rest, that the future would be built together, step by step, as a family. The stagecoach driver, who had been waiting impatiently for a sign of their decision, called out again. Last call, for Ashford. The sound of his voice was a distant echo, but it brought Anna back to the present, her heart still pounding in her chest. She pulled away slightly, looking up at Ivan with a tear-streaked face and a small but radiant smile. I'm not going, she whispered, the weight of the decision lifting from her shoulders. I'm not going anywhere. Ivan's face lit up with the kind of joy he hadn't felt in years. And in that moment, everything seemed to fall into place. Home, he whispered, his hand brushing a lock of hair from her face. You're home, Anna. You always were. They both turned, and as they walked away from the stagecoach, hand in hand, the world seemed to open up before them, full of possibilities, full of hope. The journey that had brought them here was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, they were ready to face whatever came next, together. When they arrived back at the ranch, the children were waiting, their excited voices ringing out as they saw their parents walking toward them. Tommy and Grace rushed to Anna, their arms wide as they shouted, "Mama! Mama's back!" Anna crouched down, enveloping them in a hug, her heart overflowing with love. "I'm home," she whispered, the words feeling like the truest thing she had ever said. "I'm never leaving again." Tommy, with a serious expression on his face, asked, "Promise?" Anna smiled, brushing his hair from his forehead. "Forever promise," she said softly, her eyes glistening with love. Grace, too, wrapped her tiny arms around Anna's neck, whispering, "Mama, forever, forever." Anna laughed, her heart full. "Forever, forever," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. Ivan, standing beside them, placed his hand on Anna's shoulder, his gaze soft as he looked at her, his children, and the family they had become. "She's going to be your mama," Ivan said, his voice full of quiet pride. "Truly, forever." The promise they had made to each other was more than just words. It was a vow that would carry them through whatever came next. A week later, in the early morning light, Ivan and Anna were married on the ranch, surrounded by their children and the few people who had supported them along the way. The ceremony was simple, wildflowers in abundance, the preacher's words full of warmth and meaning, and the children acting as the best witnesses, their innocent joy filling the air. When the vows were exchanged, Anna and Ivan both knew this wasn't just a new beginning. It was the foundation of everything they had built, everything they would continue to build together. And as they shared their first kiss as husband and wife, they knew that no matter what the world had thrown at them, they had found each other and they would never let go.